welcome back. It is the Vegas Take rolling out on a Wednesday. Sharp and Shapiro, so glad you could join us. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that there was a Democratic debate last night on CNN. We'll get to that. It's always a pleasure to have this guy on the show. He's a former Democratic presidential candidate. He is also a war hero, and he's out there in Massachusetts, congressman out there in Massachusetts. Always appreciate it when he comes on. That would be Seth Moulton. Seth, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to be back.
Always appreciate it when you come on. All right, let me start with the billion-dollar question. You know I'm going to ask about this. With all of your experience at war as a politician, what do you make of Donald Trump's decision to withdraw troops from Syria?
It's betrayal, plain and simple. And, you know, one thing you learn in the military is that there are a lot of ways you can screw up. You know, I mean, you can fail physically, you can fail to find the mental courage, you can have the wrong tactics, the wrong strategy. There's a lot of mistakes you can make that cost lives with high cost. But there is nothing worse, nothing more evil than betrayal. And that's exactly what this president has done to our Kurdish allies, to the only allies we have right now between us and ISIS, the people who have been putting their lives on the line to protect us from terrorism.
Right.
And we've just said, we don't care. And I mean, I've spent time on the ground in the Middle East where we had to work hard to convince local allies like the Kurds or Iraqis or over in Afghanistan to work with us, to trust us, to be willing to put their lives on the line, not just for their country, but for ours. And the way that worked was that we were able to convince them that we had their backs, that we're asking you to help us, and in exchange, if you ever need help, we will help you. Now we're giving up that promise.
Yeah,
and I guarantee you, and I never want to speak for the troops, but a lot of the troops on the ground have already spoken themselves. It is an utterly embarrassing, shameful situation that the commander-in-chief has put them in on the ground.
It has to be. Now, do you think that this is a favor to Russia and Putin because they benefit from this?
They benefit from it. Assad, the butcher of Syria, benefits from it. ISIS benefits from it. I mean, the worst predictions have already come true, and it's getting worse day by day. So some of the worst ISIS prisoners have now been released, set free. Russia is taking our place as a Kurdish ally. The Kurds have been forced to work with Assad, who's literally butchered their people, just to have someone to protect them from the Turks. And of course, Erdogan in Turkey, who's like aspiring to be Vladimir Putin, he's looking great on this too. I mean, he just calls the president and asks for a favor, and the president does a favor.
I want to ask you about that.
Of Turkey, while betraying our troops.
Seth, I want to ask you about this. People like Lindsey Graham, when it comes to this impeachment inquiry, when it comes about trying to get dirt on a political opponent to another foreign entity, in this case, the president of the Ukraine, many Republicans did not speak out against it. In fact, some of them even call it a nothing burger to this day. Yet people like Lindsey Graham, when it comes to Syria and the withdrawing of troops, now all of a sudden they're turning against the president. Why?
Because Lindsey Graham is more concerned about the domestic, the political consequences for his own future than doing the right thing.
Wow. Yeah.
And he thinks that he can criticize the president on foreign policy, and people back home in South Carolina are not going to care as much than if he, weighs in on the way of the law with impeachment. It's significant that way back when the Constitution was first written up by the founding fathers said that one of the most significant threats to our republic will be the potential for foreign governments to interfere in our elections. Because if voting doesn't matter, if citizens know that it doesn't matter who they vote for because France or Germany, or in this case, Russia, is just going to decide the election for us, then that undermines the very bedrock principles of our democracy. It makes it fail. And the Republicans in Congress are now just saying, oh, yeah, Washington, Franklin, they're all wrong. They're all wrong. It doesn't matter. It's okay for Vladimir Putin to decide who should be the next president and to actually influence votes.
Yeah,
that's okay. That's what they're saying. And by the way, even when Lindsey Graham gets out there and criticizes the president on abandoning our Kurdish allies, he's still working to get him reelected. He's still working to perpetuate this decision-making in the Oval Office. because he said he wants Trump back there.
You're right.
For another 4 years.
You're right. Just complete phoniness. If you're just joining us, former Democratic presidential candidate Seth Moulton. Man, I wish he was on that stage last night. I know you do too, Seth, but let's talk a little bit about that. I want to play you a clip. So Mayor Pete and Tulsi Gabbard, as you know, they are both veterans. They had a very testy exchange last night in the debate. I want to play you this quick exchange, and then I want to get your response to it.
Or you can put an end to endless war without embracing Donald
Will
Trump's
you end the
policy
regime
as you're
change
doing.
war is the question.
What we are doing.
What is an endless war if it's not yet another regime change
Please.
war?
So they're going at it back and forth, Seth. What do you make of that exchange that they had last night?
Well, first of all, I think it's actually a good thing that at least we're finally discussing national security and foreign policy on the debate stage. Because as we've learned with the president's disaster over the last 2 weeks, this is probably the place where the president has the most authority, because we can talk about Medicare for all, but Medicare for all isn't getting through Congress anytime soon. We can talk about all sorts of different taxes, but the president can make proposals. It's Congress that has to make those decisions and pass them into law. But the president all the time acts as commander-in-chief and makes unilateral decisions about our foreign policy. So, look, the most important thing is that we're actually talking about this finally in this presidential contest, because it's incredibly important, and we need to have a president who upholds our values. And I ran because I thought it would be good for a combat veteran to take on Trump, and bring the experience of fighting on the ground with people like the Kurds to making these decisions in the Oval Office. Mm-hmm. And so at least I'm glad, that's not an option now in this race, but at least there are some other vets up there who are talking about foreign policy and having a debate that we need to have before the American people.
Sure. What do you make of the presidential race right now where we stand? It appears as though Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden are head-to-head. Bernie Sanders trailing a little bit. I think part of that is due to some of the health problems that he had, the heart attack that he had. What do you make of where we stand right now, and did you see it being a 2 or a 3 person race to this point?
Well, actually, when I got out back in the end of August, I got out because I said, look, I don't think there's a better foil for Trump than a young combat veteran, but I always promised my supporters and volunteers and everybody else that if I didn't see a path to winning, I wasn't going to drag this out. And I said back then at the end of August that it really seems to be a 3 person race. And I'm not a pundit, but that just seems pretty obvious by the polls, and that's continued to be true, although some people, like you say, maybe say it's only a 2 person race right now. I don't think it's a good thing that this far out from the election, a whole bunch of other people really just don't have a chance. We're not really hearing from them. They're not a part of this. I think we ought to have more options than just those 3. But that's just the way that it's worked out with the system that the DNC set up.
So Tulsi Gabbard, who I thought had a very, very good debate last night, has said on multiple occasions that she believes that the DNC, the primary, the entire process is more or less rigged. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't know if rigged is the right term or not, but I will say this. When you repeatedly exclude the only combat veteran in the race was myself, the only governor from a state that Trump won, which was Steve Bullock, repeatedly excluded from the debate stage. I don't think you've set up a smart process to fix the best person to take on Trump, right? And that ultimately should be what the party's trying to do. Mm-hmm. So you have a system where it's more about online donors and viral following and whatnot than actually presenting the best contrast to Trump. And I'm not sure that's a smart system, but it is what it is. I mean, it's not my job to just complain about it.
So basically, it's turned into exposure versus resume.
Well, I mean, look, it should be about leadership, not just about resume or not just about exposure, but it really is just about exposure at this point. And that's what we've seen with the options that that seem to be, at the forefront of the contest right now.
Yep. Seth, I know you only got a few more minutes, so I want to ask you one loaded question here, and I guess it's a two-part question. First of all, it seems like people on the right that think that this impeachment inquiry is a joke, all they want to do on Fox News is talk about Hunter Biden and the Bidens and possible corruption, even though in my personal opinion, there's no evidence to back that up. They didn't do anything wrong. They didn't break the law. And then you have a lot of people on the left, or a lot of people, listen, more than 50% think that the president should be impeached. 25% of Republicans think that the president should be impeached. So my second question to you is, do you think that the president will be impeached?
Well, I think he's certainly going to be impeached in the House. Whether or not he's convicted in the Senate and actually pushed out of office remains to be seen. But, I mean, this, again, goes back to something the Founding Fathers warned us about in the 18th century, that you cannot let foreign powers interfere in our elections. And this is far worse than they imagined, because this is a president of the United States asking a foreign power to interfere in our elections. And he's done it with Ukraine. He's done it with China. He did it very publicly with China. No question about what was said in that, because he did it at a press conference. So this is the worst of the worst, and absolutely he should be impeached. It's interesting when you go on Fox News and you hear Republicans complaining about this, they're always talking about the process. They're always talking about someone else. It's not just your opinion that Hunter Biden is innocent. That's fact. There's no evidence of wrongdoing there. But they just want to talk about Hunter Biden and the process of impeachment because they don't want to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the president's behavior. And that is the question here. Mm-hmm. The question at hand is whether the president of the United States violated the oath of office. And I think it is abundantly clear that he has.
And many people are agreeing with you. As I said, more than 50% of Republicans and Democrats and 25% of Republicans, which is a very telling stat. Seth, I always appreciate it so much when you take some time to join us and give us your insight. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can catch up with you again soon, okay?
All right, I look forward to it. Keep it up, guys.
All right,
thanks a lot,
very much. There you go. Former Democratic presidential candidate Seth Moulton. Might I also mention, I know he's a very modest guy. This guy has won medals at war.
He's a war hero.
He's an absolute war hero, and he's also a Harvard graduate. And unlike Jared Kushner, his daddy didn't pay for him to get into Harvard.
He earned it.
That's
exactly.
Right. I have the utmost respect for this guy. Let me tell you something else real quickly. I'm not going to say who it was, but somebody who I consider a friend. This was the day when Donald Trump says, whoever Seth Moulton is, he dropped out of the race. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but you remember that, JD, when Donald Trump tweeted that out?
I thought that was one of the weirdest things for him to tweet. That was so odd. But I do recall that vividly.
JD, the reason why I bring that up is because a friend of mine posted something on Facebook that day, kind of reiterating what Donald Trump said. He said, who the hell is this Seth Moulton guy? So I said, Seth Moulton has more heroism and bravery in his fingernail than you have in your entire body. That's what I said to this guy. And then he stopped talking to me for a few months, and then I had a conversation with him. I said, do you realize who Seth Moulton is before you make an idiotic comment like that? This man fought at war, won medals, risked his life. And you're going to disparage a guy like that because you're following, your messiah, Donald Trump, who dodged the military?
Was it the guru?
I can't say who it is.
Okay.
But anyway, I wanted to share that story. All right, so when we come back.
He brings up a really good point. Donald Trump, the position of with the power he has over foreign affairs,
yes,
and the military it's the biggest power he has, but he has zero experience with it, so it makes absolutely no sense.
He's showing it.
His major experience is in business, and he doesn't have that much power.
Yeah, well, he's showing he showed his lack of experience.
It's such an oxymoron that he has this great amount of power and very little experience.
Yeah. Well, that's why you need experience in all categories to be the president of the United States. Yeah, I know. I agree with you. All right, so when we come back, an interesting feud that involves Beto O'Rourke and Bill O'Reilly. That's right. I'll explain exactly what that means coming up next. You're listening to The Vegas Take on the all-new 101.5 FM, 720 AM, KDAWN.